Hi, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Okay, good. We'll start in a couple minutes. So we're gonna wrap up the assignment and then complete the lab. Okay. Hi everyone. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. So in about a minute or so, we will start with wrapping up the assignment that we left off last time, and then we'll do the lab exercise today. Okay, so as some of you are joining us now, let me also open up the lab. So we're gonna finish up where we left off. I think we still have to finish number 7 and number 8 from the assignment, which is Unit 1 assignment. So if you're logged into the course room, we're gonna wrap up this one right now, which is Unit 1 assignment, and then we are gonna proceed to Lab 1. And so if you follow along, you will be able to accomplish the required tasks for the week. If you missed the first session, I have the video posted on this page. So everything for the week is in the module, okay? All right, so go ahead and get started. Do you have any questions for me before we start? All right, no questions. So the purpose of the notes is to give you some insight on how you can address the assignment question. So I'm going to refer to page 18 on the notes, and the note seems long because this is the review week. So on this page, this section, it talks about sets, and set is a container that allows us to put in unique items. So unlike the list, it has to be unique items that goes into the set. And sometime when you work with data, you might use the set. For example, if you want to look at how two sets can be a union, or two set can be an intersection, where you can identify the shared items on those sets. So sets are mutable, items on the sets are immutable. Now we can use operations like union, intersection, and complement to really look at the difference in a set, or could be combining two sets into one. There are in Python, there are two types of sets. You have immutable sets and immutable sets. So immutable sets are frozen sets. That means that they cannot change. They are similar to what you see with the dictionary, and we left off with dictionary comprehension last time. So in the frozen set, just like any container, you can use a for loop to iterate through each item in the set, okay? And when we use the set, we would use the parentheses, very similar to what you've seen in tuple. So the symbol that we would use is the parenthesis. So here we can have a set of characters, and when you use an immutable set, which is a frozen set, you would say frozen set, and that would allow you to implement the immutable set. Okay. Now, there are methods in Python package for sets. So very similar to what you've seen in list, we can use length as in the elements, the number of elements in the set. So we can use length. We can also use copy, difference, so we can differentiate the set so it will return and do the comparison for us. After it compare, it will return. So we can compare A to B. We can look at disjoint intersection. We can also look at supersets and how can it be different symmetrically. Okay, so these are some of the methods that we can implement with the set. So if you have a subset, we can use is subset method to verify. If it is, it's going to return true. If it's not, it's going to return false. And the same thing. So when you see the method that start with is, that's only going to return your Boolean values. Now, in the notes, it gives you some example on how we can look at multiple sets, so A, B, and C. And you notice that B share 4 with A and C share 5 and 6. So they have the same items. Okay. And in this case, what you see is we're using the square brace here that indicates a list within the container. So with that, what we can do is we can verify if it is disjointed. And this, in this case, we're checking A to C. So it's going to look at A to C if it's completely different. So they don't share any same element, so they are disjointed. So it's going to return true. Now we want to check if C is a subset of B. So 5, 6, are they in B? Yes, right? So that's going to return true. And so on. So you can take a look at how these methods can be implemented. And symmetric difference, we can also do the comparison with symmetric difference. And so it's going to look at the difference in both sets, and it's going to output that. Okay. Now, compared to the frozen set, you have mutable sets, which are changeable. Okay. Frozen sets are not changeable. So here you can add in items as we can modify the container. So the difference between a frozen set and a mutable set, your mutable set, you can modify the container by adding in elements or items or remove them. So to remove, you would do a discard method. And similarly, you can do the comparison using symmetric difference. Now, discard is different than remove because discard is remove specific items. So you have to tell it which one you're going to remove. Compared to remove method, when you're using remove method in Python, you will remove certain item from the set, but it's identifying specific item. Okay. So here, I think, in my opinion, if you use remove, it's going to go to the item and remove and then size down the sets. Okay. Now, if you read the documentation, discard and remove accomplish the same thing, but one gives them the space back, the storage space back, and the other one doesn't. Okay. So it would retain the size, the actual storage size. So in a way, if you use this to take out an item or this, that will be fine. Now in the pop, you can also pop, it's going to remove and it's going to return an arbitrary value for the set. So you have multiple ways to really remove an item from the set. And we can also use update. So update allows you to add items into the set. So if I want to add a sublist to the set, I can by using update. But if I use add, I can only add a single item. Okay. So forward here, it shows you how you can use vowels. And in this case, we're using mutable sets, so curly brace. Then we are going to use A and E, and we can add another character into that set. And so now if you're adding the same thing, it's not going to let you add. It won't change the set because each of the item has to be unique. So if I try to add A again and A already exists, it's not going to allow me to do that. It's still going to be the same A as it was before. So it would not have AA, it would just be AOE after this method. Okay. And so some examples shows you can also add the tuple. So you can add a container inside a container. As this is mutable, so you can add other container inside it. Okay. And then we can add other, we can add certain item. We can compare them by looking at the difference. So when you're doing a difference compared to symmetric difference, in the difference, it's going to take a look at how you set it up. So here, what I want is I want to compare A to B. So it's going to print out the difference between A to B. As they don't share any values, it's going to give you the difference from A, set A. Okay. Now in symmetric difference, it's going to take a look at both set. If they are completely different, it's going to print both. Okay. So when we do the difference, how you set up your comparison A to B is different than B to A. Okay. So in the second one, it's going to print the difference of B. The first one here, it prints the difference of A. Okay. So Python is flexible in that it allows you to use various methods. It really depends on the developer, us. We need to really use the appropriate method to obtain the objective of our program. So let's talk about number 7. So we have two sets, set 1 and set 2. And what we want to do is we want to accomplish these tasks. First, we are going to combine both set into a third container called set 3 and display its content. The next part is we are going to look at the difference between from set 1 to set 2. So we would use the difference method there. And then for the third step, we would use the intersection for the two sets. And then for the last task is to display the symmetric difference. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my number 7. So you would start with simply defining your sets. And this is mutable, so we would use the curly brace. And for the second set, so for 7A, we want to have a set 3 container, and we're going to use the union method. So you would say set 1 dot union set 2. And we're going to put that into set 3, and we're going to print. And then for B, we want to use the difference method. So we would say, you can simply pass that into print method. So we would say print set 1 dot difference set 2. Okay. Now, if you do it in reverse, you're going to get a different output. So if you say print set 2 difference set 1, it's going to give you a different output. So the exercise asks us to identify the differences from set 1 to set 2. Then for task C in number 7, we are going to look at the intersection from set 1 to set 2. So we would say print set 1 dot intersection set 2. And then lastly, we are going to look at the symmetric difference for both sets. Now this compared to this, it's going to only do the comparison from 1 to 2, where the second time when we do the symmetric difference, it's going to look at the difference in both sets. So when I run this, and you can use any IDE, of course, right? You can use IDLE, you can use other IDE like Visual Studio Code. So for A, we're going to union 1 and 2 and print it out as it stores in set 3. So we have 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, all the way through 108, repeating 103 and 104 here. You notice that it's only going to show once because they have to be unique. We would not have double 102, 103 and 104 because they are unique. It won't add it twice. So that takes care of the union for the first output here. Then in the second output, we are looking at the difference between set 1 and set 2. So 100, 101, and 102 is not in set 2. So that's why it's output this. And then for the third task, 7C, we are going to look at the intersection. What are the common items, like 103 and 104 in both sets? So that's what shows here. And then lastly, we are doing the symmetric difference. So it's going to look at the difference in set 1 and in set 2. So in set 1, we have 100, 101, and 102. Set 2 doesn't have that, so it shows that there. And in set 2, we have 105, 107, and 108. And set 1 doesn't have those, so it shows that there. So symmetric would give you the difference in both. And that would be our exercise 7 in Unit 1 assignment. Any question? Okay, no question? Okay, so this is pretty easy. Now for number 8, we have a box. This is the dimension 12 by 16 by 9. We are going to write a Python program that would use functions and methods to convert inches to centimeter. So 1 inch is 2.54 centimeter, and we want to calculate the volume. Okay. So first we need to convert its dimension to centimeter. Then we would just operate the volume calculation through multiplication operator. Okay. I'll have to do it. Hold on 1 second. Let me find my exercise. I thought I had the code there for you. In the meantime, you can set it up. I'll just do it. Give me 1 second and reopen Tony. So this is one of the exercises that we did in 30A as well. So we can say, so the exercise said that we have, so here's our dimension, right? So we can say width is equal to 12. And length is 16 and height is 9. So we set up our variable for the dimension, and then you can do the volume by multiplying these together first and then convert them, or you can convert them individually. That will be fine. So I'll just do that. Volume is equal to width times length times height. Right. Volume. Right? And then now we would do the conversion. Inch is equal to 2.54. So we would say centimeter is equal to volume times inch. And you can be in fancy and say box volume is and then we can say box volume in centimeter is. There we go. Fast. Done. So I first declare my variables for width, length, and height, right? That's given in the problem. Then I calculate my volume by multiplying them together. Then I print that out. Then I do the conversion from inch to centimeter. So I know that 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeter. So for the centimeter for the volume, and you can say vol centimeter and then change this. So my volume in centimeter is volume times inch. And so there we go. Okay. We run this again, same thing. So if you want to add like the unit, you can say inch like that. And clear this. And then if you want to add the unit to this one, you can say centimeter. And so this program should only take you a few minutes to write, as it only use variable and then multiplication operator, right, in both parts. Any question? Okay, so that should take care of 8 for Unit 1 assignment. Now we are going to look at our lab for today, and we don't have too much to do except for 4 exercises. Now in the notes, if you want to go further, before I forget, it goes over other area like functions and so on. So you will need to look at this again in case you need to review for our lab. Okay, so let's look at the lab requirement. So for part A, we are going to work with modules. And modules are simply Python file that we can use with other Python file in a program. So when you write a Python program that is a module, you can have multiple modules working together to create more of an advanced multifunctional program. The reason why we want to use module is that when you write your custom module, in the case where if you need to make changes, you don't have to change the entire program. You can change one part of the program by going into that file or that module. And many of the libraries are modules. So you would see that there are available libraries that you will find as just Python file or module that you can incorporate. Some libraries would be a package which consists of many modules. Okay. So you simply would have a file called .py, and we want to make sure that that's your file extension. Python have many different modules that you can use. I know that in the assignment, we have used math library before, but in this one, and we also use random. Okay, so I put a link here for you in case you want to go to the documentation and be able to see what type of modules that you can use in Python. Or you can also do some Google search, but in the documentation is going to give you the details as well. So now in the exercise, we'll start with part A, number 1. It asks you to write a Python program that generates a random alphabetical character, alphabetical string, and alphabetical string with fixed lengths. 12 characters using random.choice. Okay. So if you want to look at pseudo random, we can go to this. So here's random. And as we talked in the last session, pseudo random just means that it looks random, right? But because it seeds from the same value every single time, it is not truly random. In order to be truly random, you can implement system time as the seed value. So every time that we run the program, as it is different time in the time value, it would give you a truly random output. So here they provide you the documentation, and there are different methods that would go in a random library. Now you can use seed method to initialize your random number generator. And then we would go down. We talked about range last time, int. Here's random choice. Okay. And choices. So you have multiple options. And the parameter for this is going to be a sequence. So it's going to return random element from a non-empty sequence. If the sequence is empty, then it's going to raise the exception. Okay. Now random choices was different, so make sure that we refer to the documentation. So now we are going to use random choice. Okay. And for the output, for the assignment, I need screen capture of script and your output to make sure that you're successfully running the program. So in order to use random choice, I need to import in my module, which is a file in Python. So I would say import random, and random module would contain random choice. I'm also using string as the assignment call for string. So I'm going to go ahead and import in string. Let me clear this and pull this down a little. So now I'm going to display ASCII character in random, right? So I simply print out the text. I'm going to generate random alphabetical character. The reason why I import in string is that I'm able to tap into that library and use string.ASCII letters for it to generate ASCII characters randomly. So I would do a print method, and inside the print method, I would have random choice. And in its parameter, I'm going to use string.ASCII letter or string underscore ASCII letters. String dot ASCII letters and ASCII underscore letters. Say that again. Okay. So this is going to allow us to generate the ASCII letters. Then on the next part, I'm going to generate a random alphabetical string. So we can go up to 255 characters. And I want to initialize my container to start with an empty string. And then I would then loop through it. Okay. So to generate random string with characters, I would then have the variable for the length of my string and then my initialized string with empty, just with empty space first. Then I'm going to do a for loop. So I would say for I in range. As we're using values here, we're going to do a random int. We're going to start with 1 and we're going to go to the maximum length, which is 255. And we're going to increment that as we randomize the choice with the ASCII characters. So very similar to what you've seen in the last step, but in this step, I incorporate that inside a for loop. And I'm again using random choice. So it's going to generate string with random characters for me. And with that, I'm going to print it out. Then for the third part of the exercise, we are going to generate random alphabetical string with 12 characters. So similar to the last part, I'm going to initialize my string container. And again, I'm going to use a for loop, but in this one, I'm going to only go up to 12 characters. So I would pass 12 here. And just like the last one, I'm going to use the same approach. So I would have my string and I'm going to increment through to randomize the characters for my string up to 12 characters. And I will print. So this is 3 ways that we can use random.choice to generate ASCII letters for our strings. Okay, so let me pull this up a little bit and I will run it so I can show you. So for the first one, as we only generate a character, I got a P, so 1 letter that's randomly generated or pseudo-random. For the second part, as it would go up to 255, you would see that it will be a very large string. So ASCII is a way that we would represent text. It's a system that the computer would use to encode values. So it would represent your letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on, and some symbols. Most programming languages use ASCII. There are different systems for text, but ASCII is one of the systems that the computer uses to give us text or display text. And if you want to check out which value is which, you can refer to ASCII table. Okay. So in the second part, as I randomize the characters for my string up to 255, I got this long string with randomized characters. For the script, can you generate the lowercase or only uppercase letter? You can do both. You can do all lowercase if you force it to be all lowercase. So that's a good question. I'm going to show you the ASCII table then. So when you're looking at the ASCII table, let's go to this one, right? Now the lowercase letter have higher values as numbers, right? Compared to the uppercase, which are lower in values. So if you want to force it to be all lowercase or all uppercase, you have to work with different ranges of numerical value for the system to generate just lowercase or uppercase. Another way to get around this in Python is you can generate all the characters in both upper and lower cases, and you can use the upper and lowercase method to force it to be a certain way. Okay, so you can do it that way. So in our case, because we didn't restrict or use specific range in ASCII, we are going to get upper and lowercase. Other questions? Okay, so for the third part of my program, I'm only generating 12 characters, okay, for my string, and it's randomizing the characters. So here we are going to get this, right? You're welcome. So now, when do we really, you can do this for, randomized generated automated passwords. You can use it for automated pins where you would use values instead of ASCII letters and so on. So this teaches you on how you can generate, right, random characters in a string or just a character, right, in the first part. Or you can also restrict the number of characters. Now, if you think about brute force program is really designed to plug in different values or characters. Let's say if I'm trying to brute force passwords, okay? What my script can contain is I can make it randomized, or I can put in a specific list of words that it would use to be able to plug in. So using a list, I simply put the list word in text format, like the .txt, have Python read every single word on that list. And as it reads it, it would then plug it into, the field for the password. Now, if I want to implement randomized characters to see if there's a match, I can implement something like this, okay? So in a way, we can see some relevant use in a lot of different areas where whether you design an application to just generate, characters or values with random or pseudo-random, or if you think about security sense, that would be something that we can implement. Okay. So when you look at these brute force password script, a lot of times they would use an external list, and simply the code is to read that list and take every single word on that list and be able to output, to plug it into the field to see if it's a match. So if you have a longer list, brute force application works better. Okay. So if I have a list of 50 words, it might not have a match. But if I have a list of 50,000 words, right, that would allows me to brute force a dictionary attack on a certain, maybe a website or whatever it is. Okay. Question. Okay, so that takes care of the first exercise for our lab today. Just a few minutes. In the second one, I want to use this one to kind of address some of you might be interested in working with CSV and Python for data analysis, or even for security students, the system might give you CSV file. So CSV stands for comma separated values. It looks like a spreadsheet or Excel. You can pull this from databases. Normally, a database system would allow you to be able to generate reports in CSV, in PDF, or in another format. Now, in analysis, a lot of the time we prefer CSV, so that way we can look at how the data is organized in items, in rows and columns, so in fields. Okay. And so we can use this and have Python read it and be able to interpret or analyze our data. Now, you don't have to use California Open Data. You can use another CSV file. Okay. I put the link here if you want to access public data for California, but there are, if you like Kaggle, you can also use Kaggle. If you're not familiar with Kaggle, you can go to kaggle.com. They have some fun data on there for you to use. Okay, so you can go to data sets. Some data sets are free, some are not. Okay. So you can download data sets that would relate it to different things like transportation, crimes, games, data science job salaries, fast food restaurants. So these people, they share data sets. Now, like I mentioned before, not all data sets are free, and sometimes it will require you to use your Google account or a login to be able to, an account to access it. But you want to look for the CSV file. Okay. Like if I want to do Pokemon stats, I can download that. It'll tell you the size. So in this exercise for number 2, you can use any CSV file. Okay. So what I did was I downloaded a CSV file from California Open Data. I was interested in looking at like fire and so on. Okay. Now for Python, we can use csv.reader. The reader method allows you to read the CSV file. Okay, if you go to the documentation for Python, you can see that they dedicate the module for CSV. And as you look through it, reader is the first one here. So you need to import that in and be able to read the CSV file. You can also use Writer, and there are other methods in here to be able to use CSV. So as some of you are going into data science, this might be very useful for you. But we're going to do a simple task. Let me close this and let me open my lab 2. Okay, so very important. So once you have your CSV file, so let's say that I like my this data set, right? Make sure that the name that you use when you download is the same name that you use in your script here. Okay. And when you write the script, make sure that that CSV file is in the same folder or the same location on your computer as your script. Okay. So as you can see, my station 1, this is my file. It's in the same folder as my script. It needs to be in the same location. Otherwise, you have to specify the path of your file here. Okay, like C drive, downloads folder, etc. Okay. So the simplest way is to download the file and make sure that it is in the same location as your script, meaning in the same folder. If your script is on the desktop, put your CSV file on the desktop. And when you write your script, make sure that this is the same name as your CSV file. Okay, that's important. So let's go through the program now. So I'm going to use CSV modules. So we're going to do import CSV. And what I want to do with this is I want to open up that file and I'm going to read it, right? Have Python read it. Okay. So in our exercise, it tells us that we're going to write the program, we're going to read and display the content of the file, and we're going to count up the number of lines in that file. So I'm going to use the with open statement. So if you took CIS30A with me, you saw some of this already when we work with file input and output. So we're going to say with open, and in here, I would put the file name in exec. You cannot use a different file, otherwise it's going to throw an error. So I have station 1 CSV. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's the same and it's in the same location as my script. And for the second parameter, I'm going to do a new line with the space. And so it's going to open up this file as a CSV file. So I give it an identifier for that. Okay. And I'm going to have a variable called freader for file reader. And I'm going to use the csv.reader method. Because I renamed that file as a variable, I can pass that here. Now, here I want to specify the delimiter and also any kind of characters. So it's going to separate as it reads, so that way I would know what that is. So it's going to be a space and a pipe. Then what I'm going to have a for loop nested, and I can say for roll in freader. So as it reads through the file, it's going to display, it's going to print, right? And I would use a dot join row. So that would take care of accessing the file and reading the file and displaying as it reads the file. The second part of the exercise is we want to count up the line. And I still am in the indentation because I'm still looping through that. Okay. In here. So I have a count lines, and I'm going to go ahead and use the length method. And what I want to do is I want to convert the F reader, which is my variable for when it reads, and make that a list. So I'm using a list method here. And then because when I do that, it's going to put it in the container, and it's going to be able to count it up because there are many lines. So it has to be in a list container. Okay. So let me clear this from the last exercise. I'm gonna run this. So as you can see, it's reading, and depending on your file, if your file is very large, it can go on for a long time. So the CSV that I obtained was, it shows the fire station and how the coordinates for it, and you can see groundwater coming through, and the distance between that and the groundwater, and then the county locations. So if your file is very short, it's going to finish fairly quickly, right? And if your file is very long, then it's going to go on for a little bit. So it depends. Some CSV would have, 40,000 records, which are rows, and some CSV might have 200 records. Is your CSV on your desktop? I'm getting an error saying that. Yeah, my CSV is in the same location as my Python script. So if your Python script is not on the desktop, then you need to move your CSV to where you have your Python program. So to answer your question, my CSV is in the same folder as my Python program. So if you put it on the desktop, make sure your Python program is also on the desktop. Okay. So here I let it run for a while because this is the entire California data. So you can see that there's like different counties up north, San Diego, Kings, Kern. So this is a very large CSV. Okay. So it's going to go for a little bit. So you can choose the file that you want to use. So the delimiter is because you need to have what it would differentiate between one field and another field. So in that, you would have to have like a space. And what I want to use is I want to use a pipe to specify. So to clarify that a little more, I'm going to open up my CSV so you can see. I think it stopped now. So when you get your CSV file, sometimes they're clean, sometimes they're not. And in data science, we always address like how you can clean your data, right? So it's in columns and rows. But we want to specify the delimiter. So when it reads the character, Python doesn't know like where things starts and end. Okay, so you have to kind of tell it like if it sees white space, that's where things start and end. So when it reads through this, it's gonna say, oh, it's gonna read 6134, and then it's gonna continue. but there are times that you're going to see that there's white space in between for the new field in that record. So you have to say what that is, okay, for the delimiter. So now it finishes it here, right? And when I did that, I dipped the count line. So my records actually, there are 6,131 records. So we went through and we had that many number lines for our entire file. Okay. Other questions? Now you notice that between the field now, it puts the comma, hence CSV. So you would have each of the fields separated by comma. And so when you use the CSV reader, it would understand that you are using a comma separated value file, okay? And you have to use a CSV file, a .csv, to use that method and this module. So in this exercise, we're addressing a few things, right? We are reviewing how we would use the with open statement to access a file in Python. And in this case, we're using CSV. We're also reviewing the module implementation concept and also using CSV.reader, okay? And with that, we would have to implement the for loop so you can read it and have it output. The reason why we use a .join here is we want to keep everything in one row so it makes sense to us in comparison to this file. Okay. Any questions? It's easily achievable, right? Okay. So you can pick and choose your CSV and you can implement something like this. And so this is just one example. Of course, there are other ways to write it. Okay. All right. No question for 2? Okay, so for part B, before we get into that, I'm going to swap back to our notes. As some of you took CSE8 with Dr. Lair, you might or might not get into the class and the custom module section. I think I covered this already. So module in our notes starts on page 24. And we talked about what a module is. It's just a file in Python. You can have a package that have many modules. So in an application, if you think about like writing an application. So for example, I want to write an application that analyze my financial accounts, right? I might have, multiple Python files or modules, right? One could be for user input and then input validation. The second one could be for computation. So I would implement the algorithm. And if I design it with object-oriented in mind, then I would be able to use class and class inheritance. So, and some of you did this in 30A. Okay. So we simply would use the module. We can also use specific functions or method or even class or subclass from that module. Okay. So when you use a module, you simply use an import statement very similar to other programming languages. So that's like equivalent to C++ include, right? And then we can also bring in specific part of your module. So you can say from that module, you can import. And if you can use a wildcard like this, or you can say import and then a class name or a method name. So you can bring in specific part of that module by using the from statement. So this is just some example that you can look at on how you can use module. On the page 27, it gives you object and class. So if you have learned objects and classes in the past, so an object simply is a container or a collection of data. That could be variables, lists, dictionary, and methods. So what you can do is you can group your data and functions together in an object. And a class, it is just a blueprint for that object. Because in some cases, we might need to access that object's property. Or so for example, I might use a function from that object, right? Or many functions from that object. So when you define a class, you just say class and then the keyword. Python is more forgiving in the syntax compared to other languages when you do class definition. You can put the parentheses following the class name, or you don't have to, right? By practice, I recommend you do, but Python, you don't need to, okay? So sometimes you would see class being initiated, or your object is initialized like this. So when you see a statement like this, it's actually, think of it like a constructor. But Python does use new keyword for constructor, right? But you can define a class and then following up with the constructor. So here we would have member variables, name and age. And then you would use the self. So this is, you can use anything here. This doesn't have to be exactly self. It's just think of it like an identifier, right? In the industry, everybody in the community uses self because that's how it's written in the documentation. But you know, this is just an identifier. So when you initialize or instantiate the class object, you can specify self here, and then you would use that for the members in following. Now the object creation is actually happening here. So you define an object by stating what its name, like P1, and it is person's class object. So you would state the class that it belongs to, right? And then pass the values. Okay, and that's how you define a class in Python. Now, you can do overloads like other languages. So the self parameter in a function, the user can use that as another parameter name. Okay, it's just make it readable and easy to use. So as I said earlier, sometime we would access the variable or methods that will be your class attributes. And in OOP design, we would use class to control a lot of different things, how data is accessed. So we can do that. So some example here, it shows you how you can have instance attributes. We would start with the class N, and then we would be able to access its member and print. Then we define an object. So in the dictionary format, we talked about how dictionary uses keys. So you can use the keys in order to access it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to reteach this whole entire thing because this is part of another class, like CIS30A at the end. But the whole point in this is to help you review, because in this class, you will work with classes. And especially when we work with libraries, they are written, a lot of them are written either object-oriented, or they would have class and objects and things like that. So we want to be able to understand what that is. So you can implement inheritance in your program where you can have a class that inherit attributes from another class. Okay, you can also use super method or super function, very similar to Java. Okay, and it would be like this. So where you have the base class, and then you would have the inheritance from that class. So here I have student, right? And so if it's inheriting from another class, you would specify that inside the parentheses. You might have multiple inheritance, and your MOR is gonna, there's some local precedence ordering that you would also need to focus on if you do multiple inheritance. So I can have like a class that inherits from 2 other classes, right? So it would search for the current class. If it's not found, then it's going to go to the parent class and it's going to look for that attribute. And Python doesn't limit you to the number of class that you can implement inheritance with. So, you know, if you feel like you want to do multiple, you can. Many of the students, they simply just do one inherit from another for the requirement of the project that I did with 30A. But this is, you know, it's allowable that you can do multiple inheritance. And I think I covered that in 30A as well. Okay, so let's talk about the next part in our lab. So we would do a Python program that display a customer bank account, withdrawal balance, that would include a custom module, class, object for number 3. And for number 4, we would use the Python program to display customer contact information, mobile work, home phone, number, email address. And both of these, we want to use class object functions. Hold on one second. Let me find my program real quick. I relabel my assignment. So here we go. All right, so on the third exercise, it asks you to use class object, and we want to do a custom module for using class object. We want to display bank account information, withdrawal, and balance. Okay. So I have a module called customer, and I would have a class called account. Now here I would pass object. Okay. So to instantiate, I would do a def init. So here we would do an init function. And I have the self. So here what I'm doing is I'm constructing, right? This builds the constructor. Then I have name, account number, and initial amount. So the customer name is going to be name, NO is going to be account number, and balance is going to be initial amount. Then I have a member method or a member function called deposit. And I would have self and amount. And so as if the customer deposit the money, it's going to increment, it's going to add that to the balance. So I would do a self.balance, right? And then I'm going to increment the amount. Because I start with the initial amount, which is the balance, and then if they deposit additional money, it's going to be added. But if they withdraw, so I have a function called withdraw, and it's going to subtract from the balance. Then lastly, we have a third function called show. And this is to display the customer name, account number, and the actual balance. So my object is called S, and it's going to print S. So here in this part, we define a class, and in that we construct, right, the class, and we instantiate the object class with its members. Okay, so the members are variables and also functions or methods. Right? I'm not going to get anything because I'm still, remember that this, right? I wanted to have modules that work together because I have to have some form of input for this to really work, right? So that's one piece. This is the number 3. Let's see. Okay. So now if I want this to be a fully working program, sorry, let me go back to the other one. Then I have to have a like another module that would import this one in and be able to take some form of input. Okay, so for number 3, we're just going to write a file that has class and functions that would allow us to do like banking. So this I can incorporate with other modules and make it a full-fledged program. Okay, any question? So through this exercise, what we establish is we define class, we instantiate object class, through that we define member variables and functions. Okay, so this would cover lab 1, exercise 3. Then for exercise 4, we want to display customer contact information, mobile, home address, email address, etc. And we need to use class object functions. So first, I'm going to go over the module first for you. Okay. Similar to what you've seen in the last one. So we are going to write the module, and then we can have these two modules together. So the exercise asks us to define a class. So here I have a class called person. And again, I'm just simply using object. So we just pass object there. Then we are going to have the constructor to instantiate class objects. So we would have the init function. And just like the last one, you would have self, and then any variable that you use or the member variables. Okay, so name, mobile phone number, and you want to put none here. Okay. So I have mobile number, work phone, home phone, and email. And I would say self name is name, self mobile is mobile phone, work is work phone, home is home phone, and email is email. So once we have the member variables, we would then have the member method. The point in this is to have customer input their information. So we would have a function called add mobile phone. And this is going to allow us to store their mobile phone number. So as I'm using another variable called number, I would say mobile is number. Because on another module, I'm going to have the user input into number. And then same thing, we are going to have them add their phone, their office phone. And then for work is going to be number. Remember that work is work phone up here. So down here, right, we simply say work is number because that's what stores the value for our work phone. And then on the next method, we're going to have them add their private phone. And that will be their home phone. So here we have home phone is home. So home is going to pull from number. And then on the last method for this module is going to be add email. And email is email up here. So, and it's going to pull from address. Now, in this exercise, we are to do, so the way that I wrote this is I do 2 Python files that work together. So you can have, so here I have a client, right? And I have a contact. So contact is going to import from client. So it's going to bring this in. So they work together. And then on client, it's going to bring in contact. So I use the 2 Python files together. Any question with this? Now the next one, I'm going to show you my client. Right? So on this one, I would have from contact import person, and I talked about this just now. We can say that this module, I'm going to bring in the class person. We call it person because I'm interested in pulling this in. So I would bring in its class. So chat. I think we just talked about that. So a module is a Python file. And that Python file can be used in another Python file. So when we say module, that simply is a Python file, another Python file. Okay. So here I'm going to bring in the person class from the contact module, which is another file, right? And then I define the client class. So I have a method called show info. And with that, I would have the variable s. S is going to be the name. If the user mobile doesn't have anything, if it is none, right, then it's going to plug in the self mobile. Okay, and the same thing for the work phone, self.office, self.private, self.email. So these two work intertwined. Now I'm missing an input capability, right? So I can write a third module where it just prompts the user to input, and then it's gonna store that into here, and it's gonna use this to work with this. So that's how you can have two modules, right? They each have a class, and this one access person's class object attributes. Any question? So in order for module to fully work, yeah, the input is for number, right? Yes. And you don't have to make it a full-fledged program. I'm more interested in, you know, for you to really understand how to define a class. So what you should ask me is, what makes this different than this? Okay. So when you look at this client file or the module, you would see that I didn't use the init function in this one, right? You can define a class without the init function. Python automatically instantiate the class object. So you don't have to do like the other one where you specified this, right? It's an additional line because you're still going to have to do the self dot over here. But ultimately, if you skip that part, it's still going to be able to instantiate your class object because the interpreter is designed to do that. Whereas if I do it up front, it does it because I specified that it needs to do it. So either way, it still works. By practice, they recommend that you do it this way, but you don't have to do it with the init function to define your class. Okay. So when you write a module, right, for an object-oriented program, you should use class objects and you should instantiate your class object. So on my third file, I can, you know, to make it fully work for like a banking application, I can create another class, and then I would, make sure I can globalize some of the variable, and then I would have the user input into number, and then, because in the program I already state number, right, for input. Any question? Okay, so we have contact for email and work phone and mobile phone. Then we use that for our second module. And that's how you can customize the module with class objects. So I hope this gives you a little bit of exposure. If you haven't seen this before, I encourage you to look at the notes and, look at the example, and you can write the example and run the example. I do have 30A videos on YouTube. So if you took, a different Python class and you want to review some of the concepts, you can also use the video to look at. But this is just to cover some of the things that we might look at in the future. Where were you referring to the third module? I don't have a third module written because it's not required. Okay. But you would write a third module for user input if you want the program to fully have, because when you run this, it still works, right? Oh, let me see. I do actually have a third module. 1 second, okay? Jack import person. Or name person from contact. Yeah, I removed a file. Person from contact. I'll show you the hard code way. Hold on 1 second. All right. So I actually have a fourth module, C info, right here. And this, I didn't use the input, but actually hard code in the name. So I would have from contact import person, from client import client, and then here I created an object. P1, right? And I'm using person. Recall that person comes from here. Okay. And then I would have, instead of having the user input, I just simply pass the actual username. So Joe Smith, and then their work number, and then their email. So this is the first object that's for one person, and then the second object for the second person. And then I would use the add email to add, right? Because recall that I had Sorry, I'm trying to flip it. Add email down here from person. So you can import in a class and then access its variable, right? And method. So work phone, specify work phone, and then email. Then for the contact list, I simply list the two objects. So I put that into a list. And then I would have a for loop to iterate through that. So if I want, I can print out the contact list, which is going to pull from the other two files, right? The variable and the methods in order to plug this in. Now, if you want to do an input, then you can have it, the input stored to number, and then you would convert that. But hard coding in to test first is okay. You know, it kind of see if your object works or not. So. Any question? Okay, so for 4, you can just use the contact and the client. That's probably is good enough. I just want you to be familiar with how you would define a class and be able to work with multiple modules. Okay. And then if you want to test it, you can add in the third one like this. Any other questions or questions? I didn't even know you can import from other Python programs. Yes, you can definitely do that. You can do that from libraries from other developers. You can write your own files. So the whole point is to really streamline the process. We don't have to start from scratch. We can, you know, so when you see the import statement in the future in this class, when we're using libraries, you're going to see a lot of that, right? Like we are going to pull in some, you know, files that other people wrote and be able to do that to really build out our program. And you can write a package where you can have many different files and they can work all together. Now, as you have classes and class inheritance, sometimes you have to control access to different part of your class. That presents problems for many students. And so what they eventually doing is to make it on them all public. But, you know, if you understand how to control your classes, that way you can control what kind of data that's being accessed, what kind of resources being accessed, like methods and functions from those classes. So object-oriented design is really a way that we can build layers into our programs and be able to control the resources in our program. Now, modular approach is where we would have many different files working together like this. The cool thing about this is I can change up this and it won't impact the other two, right? So the whole point is to be able to separate components of your program so that way when you make modification to part of your program, it will not impact the others. Because your programs might not be like 20 lines. In the future, your programs might be a lot more lines, right? And so we want to make a longer program into subcomponents so that way when we troubleshoot it, it's a lot easier for us to go to and look at subsection of it versus going through the entire program. So modular approach is highly recommended, and it is very useful in practice. So, you know, I like having modular approach. If I'm a developer, I would like to have that options to be able to build out my program, and you can scale it. You can make it larger, and it will be easier. So you just add more modules to it. So for example, like you can add additional features. So what if I wanted to add additional features to this program? What if I wanted to go beyond just contact information? I wanted to add in employment history or salary, I can write additional module for those things versus relying on one file, right? You know, so I can import in the other files now to handle employee salary or employee schedule or, you know, other things that would relate to the employee. So it's definitely convenient. Okay. Questions? How would contact PY change if you didn't use init? So here's contact PY. If I remove init here, because if you compare this, that doesn't have anything, right? You would just still define your variable like that. So no, so if you omit that, it would still be fine, because what happens is the interpreter in the background, it understands that your work phone is this, right? So what we did was we reassigned work for work phone. So if you can instantiate the object or construct it by doing it this way. Okay. Or, sorry, without it. Where is it? Like this, without it. And in the example of the notes, I do show both. So you can do one or the other. Many of my students ask, like, does it matter? Doesn't matter in Python as far as the goal that you're trying to do, right? Like it's still gonna have the class. The interpreter is gonna still know that this is a class. But you know, if you have this, it's just having the constructor for the object. So it is better in a way, right? But you don't have to have it. You can omit it. So when you remove this, you have to pass self up here. Okay. So if you look on oh, maybe I did. This one. Yeah. So on, see how this class doesn't have the init function, right? Your function, your method, your member method have to have the self inside the parameter. So you can do with or without. Like you can define a class like this, like class ABC, without having the init function. Okay. But if you read like some of the documentation for the library and you look at the code, like especially on GitHub, you would see that a lot of them, most Python developer, they would use the init function for instantiation of that class object. So when you do the init, it instantiates the attributes. Now, if you don't type out that line, interpreter still does it, right? But when we track it through code, if you instantiate the attributes for that class. Okay. Okay. So that wraps up for today. I have Noel, Jason, Jimmy, Shreya, and Joseph and Jarrell here. If I can ask you to type in your name, and then I will add in attendance for this week after today. Thank you. And so I will stick around until 7 for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so that way I can push stuff on YouTube tonight. And then I will link that to your lab tonight in case you need to go back and look. Okay. Any questions?